Gloria Laker Aciro was a teenager when war upended her family's life in northern Uganda. The Lord's Resistance Army, known as the LRA, led by the infamous Joseph Kony, were known for their brutality and for kidnapping children and making them child soldiers and child brides. As a young woman, Gloria became a reporter in a small newsroom. At night, she'd sleep outside on a veranda with her younger siblings and other displaced persons. Gloria became a journalist so the world would know about the suffering in northern Uganda, the abductions, killings, the ambushes, and the destruction. But after a few years, she wondered if focusing on bloodshed was the right approach. What if journalists like her could help bring peace to the country? Today, Gloria is the director of the Peace Journalism Foundation of East Africa. Peace journalism, as you might remember from one of our previous episodes, is when editors and reporters make choices that improve the prospects for peace. Gloria writes about peace and conflict, refugee issues, and the environment. She also trains journalists around East Africa in peace journalism. Gloria was a finalist for the 2022 Women Building Peace Award given by the United States Institute of Peace. Stephen Youngblood, the director of education at Making Peace Visible, played an important role in Gloria's remarkable story. Over a decade ago, Stephen introduced Gloria to the practice of peace journalism. Together, they've trained young journalists all over Uganda. Stephen sat down with Gloria recently to reflect on her decades in the field in Uganda and the real impact of peace journalism in the face of war and gang violence. Here's their conversation.
Gloria, first, could you tell us about those days during the war and what it was like to live in northern Uganda then, and the steps you and your family took to stay safe?
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for having me in this show. First of all, I would like to drive you back to northern Uganda back in the days when the war had just begun. I had just completed my primary education when the first war broke. So it was very difficult because we had to move from home to home. First home, our ancestral home was called Tochi. It became impossible when the rebels started raiding the villages. So life there became very difficult. We moved to another house. My parents had another house in the suburb of Gulu, not necessarily so close to town. So we moved there with hopes that somehow the place would be much safer. But when we reached there, the rebels again started raiding these communities. Then we again relocated. So it was very challenging. I remember I was studying in Kampala, but every holiday I had to move back to Gulu. And the journey of 6 hours would take us 2 days because when you reach Karumba, the bridge connecting northern Uganda to other parts of the country, you find a convoy and lines of vehicles waiting for military escort. So that was really hard. And when I get to Gulu, instead of going to our ancestral home and live peacefully with my family, I have to stay in the suburb house, in the displaced house in Gulu municipality. So yet we don't even sleep there. We stay there during the day. We cook food from there. Then in the evening, my sisters and I and my brothers, we carry our beddings like blanket and something small for sleeping like mats. We go and sleep in the verandas of Gulu town. Why was this happening? Because the rebels had become so violent that they would raid this very displaced house. So it was very challenging, very difficult. We suffered a lot, and you sleep there with so many other displaced persons. Then you walk back in the morning home. And most of our time, we just sit on the veranda. You don't know where your next meal will come from. You're not sure you'll eat because your parents are not able to go to the villages to pick food for fear of the rebels' abduction or stepping on landmine. So life was extremely hard. We really suffered a lot. And my sisters their education was also affected. Today they go to school, tomorrow they don't go, especially like when the rebels have crossed in a certain community, they would dare come up to the municipality. So when you risk and send your children, the fear of abduction, the fear of stepping on landmine, and you're not sure of what you're going to eat, it was extremely challenging. So as a child growing in that environment, this was a foundation to me becoming a journalist.
And I think that, knowing you as I do, the turmoil that you went through during those days has helped to shape you as a very determine's a nice word, a very determined person that you are today. So it was during this tumultuous period then that you began your career as a journalist. So if you could lead us through a little bit how and why you started reporting, and maybe what special challenges you faced as a female war reporter.
What made me become a journalist? That painful experience of sleeping with my siblings in a rice huller machine. We had a maize miller machine. It belonged to my uncle. My uncle realized how we were really moving from place to place, so he offered that place to my mom. We used to sleep in the rice and the maize miller until when the rebels started attacking that very village. Then we moved to sleep in the verandas of Gulu town. Now, that experience has remained also fresh in my mind, because you can imagine sleeping with the machinery full of grease and smelling. You can't sleep there. We move to town every morning. We come back in the evening. We cook food from this rice miller house. Then we walk back to sleep. And there you find so many internally displaced persons. And you sleep on the veranda outside, not even inside. All the rooms are full. If you delay, you won't get where to sleep. So being a responsible girl, I think when I was in Form 2 or 3, I asked my dad, I said, Daddy, how come? Because my dad was a very good listener of radio, BBC radio. So he was always listening to BBC. And I asked him, I said, Daddy, how comes that they report about conflict or problems in other countries, in other places, but they don't mention what we are going through in Northern Uganda? I want to become a journalist so that I can also report the war. And my dad told me, you are still young, you've not completed secondary education. First study, then I will take you to the newsroom. So when I completed my secondary education, I went to my dad and I reminded him, I said, you take me to the news organization. And indeed, my dad saw I was serious. So daddy carried me on his bicycle. We rode to the New Vision office in Gulu town, and he introduced me to one gentleman called Pellegrin Otonga, and he said, this is my daughter, and she wants to report about the war. Pellegrin looked at me. I was young. At that time, I was around 21, 22. He looked at me and he said, this girl cannot manage. It's very challenging field. And he refused. I went back now alone the next day, and Pellegrin agreed and said, okay, here, this is a camera. So there was a human rights conference in Gulu town. We went and said, take pictures. And my pictures were bad. So my first time joining the newsroom started from that painful experience. The next day I went and I started attending the editorial meeting. And one thing that I can always never forget is that whenever my sisters would pick their blankets and walk back to the house, the displaced house, I would always carry an extra cloth. Now, this cloth, when I reach the newsroom, I go very early. By 6, 7, I'm already in the newsroom, while others come at 8. By 6, 7, I'm there. I take a bath using the newsroom bathroom. I put on the extra cloth I have carried, clean the place, then wait for editorial meeting. I made it a point when I reach the newsroom early, before the editorial meeting come, I've already boiled our tea, arranged the tables, waiting for the meeting. When the editor comes, he assigns us. But he would never allow me to go alone to the field. He made sure I go with at least a male journalist. We are on about 4 reporters, 3 male and 1 lady, and the lady was me. So we would hold our meeting, and it's so and so there was an attack in this village, go with Gloria. Dennis, today go with Gloria. James, tomorrow you're with Gloria. He would distribute us according to events. And then in the evening, we return from the field, we finish up filing our stories, we write them in a piece of paper. Then you walk to the post office, the only fax machine. We had just 1 fax machine in the entire region, in the entire district. So we would take our handwritten news story and fax it to Kampala. Kampala pick, and then they type it, and the next day they publish it the next day. or a day after. So that was it. Sometimes if I complete my work early, I walk back to the displaced house. I join my sisters. We eat dinner from there. However, when I come back from the field late, I finished writing my stories. Then I walk to the displaced house. Displaced the verandas where we sleep with my siblings. Walk there, and then I wait when my siblings come. We put our mat there. We have our blanket. We sleep.
Gloria, that's an absolutely remarkable story. So let me ask you, when were you first exposed to peace journalism? And why did the concept of peace journalism make such a deep impact upon you?
Thank you. I started reporting as a journalist in 1996-97, shortly after the Atiak massacre, the famous Atiak massacre. So we were just these young, excited journalists. So we just dwelled on reporting the abduction, the killings, the ambushes, the destruction. Our stories were focused on the blood. We were too sensational. Sometimes I just feel so ashamed that our reportings were bad. I give you an example. There was a time when the president of Uganda had continued peace talks. There were continued peace talks. This week, this month, there's a peace attempt. The other time, it fails. And what did the media contribute? There's one particular case I always refer to. The rebels didn't attend one of the peace talks. And one of the newspapers wrote an alarming story that these guys, these leaders, the leaders or the collaborators of the rebels had received millions of shillings from President Museveni. What happened? The rebels abandoned the talks, and it was originated from the media, and there was no proof. It was just a rumor monger. They abandoned talks. They now became extremely dangerous. They were killing people, abducting and raping women and girls. So this originated from the media, and that was careless reporting by us who were being too sensational. And that was how I got tired of reporting about the war. And that was how I said, no, I think I can use the power of my pen, my paper, my recorder to write stories that can bring peace, to write stories that can promote peace building. It reached a point at around 1999, I sat back and I said, why can't we, report in a way that we can bring peace? I knew I wanted peace, but I couldn't explain it very well. However, I attended a certain conference for human rights focus, but they had a peace component for journalists. They were teaching us how to, write peace stories, but it wasn't that deep. The peace talk, that was 1998. I was one of the journalists that went and covered a peace conference in the UK. Then I continued covering different peace talks in peace conferences in Northern Uganda. Those are the experience that kept on telling me there's something you can do more. Then we continued attending trainings, peace trainings, different organizations. And slowly that started changing our mindset. Then around 2000, Mega Radio, Mega FM was established. So this gave us a foundation for practicing peace journalism. In 2008 and 2009, I was part of a training team that trained journalists in Northern Uganda on peace reporting. So I attended and I saw how Professor Stephen Youngblood was talking about peace journalism. And that's when I realized, I said, look, this is exactly what I have been trying to do. But I had no idea that when I learned about peace journalism principles, there were so many things that were lacking in my stories. So I had to now marry my little experience in peace reporting and add it to what I learned from Steve Youngblood, and eventually it led to the launching of a Peace Journalism Foundation of Uganda, which we are using to promote peace building in Uganda today and in East Africa at large.
Believe me when I say that I think I learned as much from you as you learned from me. Gloria, if you could tell us a little more, in fact, about the Peace Journalism Foundation, why you decided to launch it, some of the activities that you undertake.
Well, we launched the Peace Journalism Foundation shortly after the 2011 election. One of the reasons why we established the foundation is we realized the role of the media in peace building. The 2011 general election there were no media-induced violence because we trained so many journalists in the country. We trained journalists in different parts of the country. We traveled in almost all the major towns in Uganda in general. And one of the things we did in about 6 of the trainings, we also established community peace club. What are these community peace club? Community peace club, we looked at making them watch over the media behavior during the coverage of election, whereby peace club members have the right to go to a radio station and say, on such and such a day, your journalist was involved in promoting hate speech. So they tasked the manager to make that correction. And all these were contributing factors to having a peaceful election. So what have we been doing under the Peace Journalism Foundation? We've been mentoring journalists and training journalists. I have a few journalists, like refugee journalists and also host journalists from the host communities, whom I mentor them personally. I give them an assignment, they write this assignment, and I try to, I edit and I direct them how to write a peace journalism story. Our goal in the foundation is to prevent media-induced violence. But right now, as I speak, the goal has expanded because of the social media issues. You know how social media right now is good, yes, but it is also being misused. So we've expanded our goal now, prevent media-induced violence, but also social media by countering social media misinformation, incitement, hate speech. How do we do this? By producing a story which is not sensational, by reporting all sides. We give voice to all the parties involved. We also look into the marginalized group, for example, the refugees, the women, the landmine survivors. How are they coping up? We give them that voice because there's no one who can speak for them apart from us, the media. Then beside that, we right now, as I speak, one of our upcoming activity, we are supposed to participate in South Sudan peace and election reporting. They are organizing a group of journalists, and they have written to us that they want to partner with the Peace Journalism Foundation of Uganda in East Africa. Actually, we will appear there to mentor them and guide them on how they can report the upcoming election in South Sudan.
I understand that these days gang violence is on the rise in northern Uganda's Omoro district. You recently wrote an article on the Peace Journalism Foundation website about a group of young activists in northern Uganda who are working to counter gang violence. They go by the acronym APA. Can you tell us a little more about what the youth gangs are doing in Oromo and what the APA is doing to combat this?
Thank you so much. The APA, the peace activists in Omoro district, these are a group of young boys, only boys. I was challenging them. I said, why don't you have girls or women to join your group? They said what they're doing, it involves some peace and some toughness, because there are times when the youth attack. They've been waylaying people, like you're from work, they put a roadblock, they rob you. That is one thing they would do. Then others, they go to people's home and attack and steal their chicken, goats, They had become impossible because even when police arrest them today, another group had emerged and they had really grown. They had increased to almost all the districts, nearly all the districts in northern Uganda. That gang group. And they use knives, they even sometimes use pangas, the machetes to hack or kill people.
In these communities that are dealing with violence, what activities are the APA activists doing?
Okay, they do a lot of activities. So what they do is they go to this community and say, look, your son has been seen with wrong groups. Your son is among the boys who are doing drugs. So they start following that son slowly. So when they identify that his groups are wrong, they start sensitizing that boy from that family. So these young boys come in, this young group, the APA group come in and sensitize the parents and that young boy. But if the boy continue, raiding and attacking people on the road, that's when they work with the police. They get him arrested, they take him to police, and They sleep there. I ask them whether they take them to court. In most cases, they bring them back to the community. They bring the peace component, reconciliation, dialogue, especially. They dialogue with the community, with the parents, say, talk to your son, this has to stop. And then that has really helped them. One of the things also they do, they patrol villages. They move at night. So it is more of a community peace building effort, which is a combination of dialogue and law enforcement. To me, I think it is quite unique what they are doing. They are also handling land cases. This group, when they hear there's a land conflict in this particular community, they go and talk to both parties. Look, we are the young people. Set us good example. Why do you fight for this land? Where is the problem? How many meters do you want? So they try to dialogue. That's some of the things they are doing. Some school buildings, school lands have been taken away by rich people. So they go and they say, look, you are educated in a certain community. Now, when you take away the school land, where will the young children from this community study from? How will this community be developed and upgraded? I just like their approach. They talk to both sides.
I'm so impressed by your work, especially those projects that bring a voice to marginalized populations. And one of those populations that I know you've targeted are refugees. You and your colleagues founded something called the Refugees Online Network in Uganda. Could you tell us a little more about this and some of the work that you've done?
We founded it about in 2018 with a group of refugee journalists who are in Uganda, from DR Congo, from South Sudan, from the Upper Sudan, and also Ugandans. Of course, Ugandans, we are not refugees, yes, but we are the host country. And the reason for establishing the Refugee Online Network is to number one is to give the refugee reporters or the exile refugee journalists. We have so many of those refugee journalists who have run from their country and they have taken refuge in Uganda because of various reasons, and they are not able to practice as journalists. So I sat down with my colleagues and said, look, why don't we come up with something where you guys who are in Uganda are able to practice your profession? So that was when we established the Refugee Online Network. We look at the journalists, the refugee journalists reporting issues affecting refugees and within the host communities, because majority of them live inside the refugee settlement. So reporting issues about refugees, for refugees, by the refugees themselves and the host community. It's quite an interesting project for me because I look at the refugee journalists can report refugee issues better than anybody else because they live within the camps. We've been publishing different articles also, stories about refugees, and we are not only focused on the suffering of the refugees. We write about the success stories of refugees. We bring out the good things they are doing. For example, during one of my interviews, realized refugees are even paying tax. They are contributing to Uganda's development. We have refugees with unique talents that you find even some of them, the host communities don't have. We try to bring out those things the good things that they do more than the negative part, because in most cases we realize that most of the stories you find globally on refugees, they focus on the negative thing. Now we said, look, why don't we also write about the beautiful things that the refugees are doing? So these refugee journalists are there to bring out those hidden stories, to bring them out.
I love this idea about the refugee success stories. And as you said, this is something I wish your colleagues worldwide would do more often. It's certainly something that I emphasize when I teach about peace journalism and responsible refugee reporting. So in the minute or two that we have remaining, just real quickly, what do you see as the future for peace journalism in Uganda and maybe throughout East Africa? Do you see peace journalism spreading, or do you think this will be difficult because of a number of obstacles?
Well, there are a number of obstacles, yes. For example, issues of climate change, issues of conflict. There is continued conflict in all these East African states. But there is no way these issues can stop the spread or the promotion of peace journalism. Reason being that the existence of these conflicts in the East African states Not all, of course, but in Uganda, in Western Uganda, we have the ADF rebels. Northern Uganda, we have the land conflict, which is tearing people apart. Then there's also this conflict of climate change that very few people talk about. We have cattle keepers who are moving now away from their original homes to like Northern Uganda, trying to look for where they can graze the animals. Like, it's more of tribal conflict now between like Western Uganda and Northern Uganda. So this already shows that there is need for peace journalism in East Africa. If you look at DR Congo, Eastern DR Congo is engulfed in conflict for years and years with different groups of rebels. So there is need for peace journalism. We are actually working with a group of DR Congo journalists who are exiled in Uganda to establish a peace journalism project in DR Congo, in Eastern DR Congo. It has not been easy because it's hard to get someone on the ground. Majority of them live here because of the increasing violence in DR Congo. I really encourage my colleagues globally and regionally to pursue peace journalism, to promote it, because it can happen. Well, it might only be affected because of funding, yes, but it's a good idea and it is something that can be worked on.
Gloria, with you leading the way, I have nothing but optimism for the future of peace journalism in East Africa. Gloria Laker Aciro, thank you again so much for sharing your remarkable and inspirational story.
Thank you, Stevie.
You can learn more about Gloria and her work at the website of the Peace Journalism Foundation of East Africa. That's pjfeastafrica.wordpress.com. Please consider supporting our work at Making Peace Visible, including our education programs led by today's interviewer, Stephen Youngblood. You can learn more at makingpeacevisible.org/education. Hit the donate button at the top right to give. You can also support us by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. The Making Peace Visible podcast is produced and edited by Andrea Maraskin with help from Faith McClure. Stephen Youngblood is the Director of Education. We had technical help this time from Cindy Ayebele. Thanks so much for listening, and talk soon.